I don't know if this is gonna work. I don't think it is. Oh, that's a bummer. What's up, y'all? We'll be starting about 9 o'clock. See you guys in a bit. Yo, what up, people? Getting situated here. Give me 1 second. My goodness. What's up, everybody? How we doing light-wise here? It's a little better. It is. You're right. It is a hotel room. I'm currently in Pittsburgh. I'm doing some session work down here this week, and the rest of the boys are also in Pennsylvania, I believe, somewhere doing a writing retreat with, for the new ideas for the Patreon. I think they are typing over there. Looks like Joey's tuned in. Yeah, I'm excited. We'll start in a few minutes, give a few more people a chance to hit it here, and then we'll dive right in. I'm just going to play us in, I guess. Maybe a little bit, not for 5 minutes. I have this little amp that I bring around with me. It's really awesome. It's battery powered, and you can plug in like headphones to it. So usually on tour, I will like hook it to my belt in the green room and then plug in some headphones so I don't annoy everybody, because I do enough of that in all different ways on tour. One thing for any of you aspiring musicians out there, the best advice I can give to being on tour is to be very, very thoughtful and aware of the other people. So while you might like love to like set up your stuff on stage and just like play for a few minutes, it's usually pretty annoying, and this usually annoys the sound guy because he's trying to work and like set up microphones and you're just like blasting your amp in his ear. So that's one thing just to keep in mind for all you aspiring touring musicians out there. Play less, but play as much as you can. Oh shoot, did I just run out of battery here? I think I brought another one. 1 second. So where is everybody today? Where are you guys all tuning in from? Can you hear me? Can anyone give me like a confirmation that this is working? We rented the hotel room just for this. I'm actually in a motel. It's very sketchy. I'm just kidding. It's 9:30 or it's 8:56 p.m. here on the East Coast. Changing batteries. I always like when I watch like late night TV, I know there's like a live audience there, but I've always like wondered how weird it must be for like, I don't know, like Conan O'Brien or like Jimmy Fallon or something like that. They have to be like overly animated on camera. Like if you had a conversation with someone and they use the same like enthusiasm and mannerisms as someone on television, it would be really weird, I think. So I'm like getting a dose of that right now because usually like I'll give a Skype lesson, but I'm like talking back and forth to someone. And I guess we can do that. We can have that conversation uh, through the comments. And please do. Please help alleviate me feeling like a crazy person sitting in my hotel room talking to myself and like oddly looking at myself too. That's weird. Anyone else with me on that? Oh, come on. There we go. We're back in business. All right. So, one piece of advice, like I said, when you're touring, you're also looking at myself. One piece of advice that I was saying earlier was just on tour, like not to play a lot because, like it's annoying. So, I have this little battery powered amp and I can like plug in my headphones and hear like kind of an amplified sound. But even like the sound of an electric guitar played like unplugged is annoying when you don't want to hear that shit. Pardon my French. Also, musician advice, actually, this is number one. It's like always tune your instrument. Always. I went to a show in a pretty like storied music venue in New York's West Village in Manhattan. And the guitar player is like a fairly well-known person. I'm not gonna like bring up his name, at least in the New York City scene, like pretty well known. His guitar was just like noticeably out of tune. And it negated all the beautiful things he was doing on the guitar. It was really sad. So always tune your guitar instrument. If you're in a studio session too, before every single take, tune, because you never know if you like nail that perfect take, and if it's out of tune, like it's not a good thing. Can you guys hear my guitar? Is that a good volume there? Thank you. All right, so let me get this. I have this root beer candy in my mouth. I want to give you guys my fully undivided attention here. All right, so 9 p.m. Welcome to the first Kindo Group Lesson. First and foremost, just want to say thanks so much for being here and being part of the Patreon process. I know we probably sound like broken records when we say it, but like it's really none of it's possible. This is possible without your support, and we've been able to kind of like circumvent or having a record label, and you can always not have a record label, but then it's like, how do you wait, what did that say? I don't know who Tonto Corazon is, but that might be the comment of the year. I think that's my favorite one. But anyway, yeah. So not having to have a record label, you still need to come up with ways to create content, and none of that's ever free. So we really thank you guys for for helping us out with this. Love you too. And being a part of it, because as you guys have been seeing, and I hope, and maybe you can share in the comments, I hope you guys have been having a positive experience with Patreon, of just being more connected with us and getting new music every month. That's been it's been a really amazing experience, in that when you have to keep creating stuff, you develop kind of a rhythm of being proactive with like kind of extracting this creative vibe out, or really just like being able to tap into it on more of like a on-demand thing, which was new for me at first. But I feel that, in the past like 2 years that we've been doing this, like it's really helped me grow as a musician, as a writer, as a player, as a friend, all these things. So I'm going to get into it a little bit today. And what I wanted to talk about today, especially this being the first group lesson, I know obviously everyone, hopefully everyone who is here is a musician of some kind who is interested in learning about music, but I'm also going to talk about other things, mainly like my approach to music and my approach to the instrument. But also, I was talking a little bit about like touring vibes before and things like that. So if you guys do have any questions, we will have like a question and answer segment at the end, probably like the last like 15 minutes, and or maybe less. I mean, if you have no questions, like maybe I just did a really good job. I doubt that's going to be the case, but we'll have a question and answer thing at the end. But if at any point, if something I'm talking about, if I'm moving too fast, or if you have a question about something I just mentioned, like feel free to just blast that in the comments. I think it comes in pretty quickly, so I will. I'll as they come in, I'll try to keep an eye on that. My main shit stain John Pop. I fucking love that. That's so funny. All right, so any guitar players out there, or if you want to just comment your instrument real quick, that way I kind of know reference wise what I'm dealing with here. I see a couple guitar players that I know of. Chris plays guitar. Right on, brother. Raise his hand. All right, cool. I'm skin flute. Nice. Who is that? I'm so curious to who that is. Part of me feels like it's like Steve. Keys and learning bass and trombone. Cool. So we have a myriad of instruments. I personally am mostly a guitar player. Just a quick brief history about my getting to guitar. When I was younger, I actually started playing drums. I saw a drums comment there. Right on. I started playing drums when I was young, and then when I was in elementary school in Brooklyn, they had a pretty dope orchestral program. So I kind of like bounced around, like, violin, cello, like all the typical instruments. And then I think when I was in third grade, my program got a couple of mandolins. So I started playing that because I was like, oh, this is kind of like guitar. It's pretty cool. And then my dad saw me just like doing all this like chicken picking stuff, and he bought me a guitar when I was 8. And I was just like, whoa, this is so much cooler. Like, and I from that point on, I've just been on guitar. In more recent years, I've been trying to, learn keys a little bit better. I understand like the theory and the know-how behind the instrument, but I just don't have like the practice, the repetitions, or really the drive to learn a new instrument. But I'm going to try to share some pretty, hopefully like easily applicable concepts today. And really what I'm going to start with is just the major scale. And I want you guys to think about, and at least how, when I was taught music theory, which was actually pretty late in life, I just kind of like was always a guitar slinger who just like listened to records and learned things that way. But what I was taught was that a note is like a letter of the alphabet. A chord, which is, multiple notes, is like a word. And then when you have chord progressions and songs and things like that, that's like a sentence or a paragraph or some kind of story. And I like to think of it just like a language as well, just because, it is. I think they've done like, I don't know, like brain scans of people playing music in the same areas of the brain that control language light up. So if we can kind of use that sort of structure where if we want to create a word, we need to put multiple letters. And if we want to, make a sentence or tell a story, we need to be putting those words together. So first and foremost, I think like if you're going to be playing music, you should hopefully have something valuable to say. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is we would need to get technically proficient at our instrument, which is just like the physical know-how of playing. We need to understand it like theoretically, and we need to be able to apply it like in real time and in practice. So that's a lot of different areas to get good at, so usually what happens is we work on one area and then maybe the other area doesn't get as much love at that time and it has to play catch up. So like a lot of times you'll see, especially guitar players, you see all these kids who can really play their instrument, but maybe they're just being a little bit too notey or like saying too many words or something like that. And we've all had the experience where that's a turnoff, and conversely, I mean, I grew up listening to a lot of blues music where you'd have a guy just play one note, but just play it in such a way that sounded like he had something important to say, or there was feeling behind it. And that phrasing, that choice of phrasing ends up being the more valuable skill set, right? So anyway, we want to make sure we're saying something with our instruments, hopefully something valuable. And I had just like a little bit of a side real quick. I had an English professor in college who, every time she would assign a paper, like we have to write, like read a bunch of stuff and write a bunch of stuff, we would ask her like, oh, like how long does it have to be? And it's usually like 5 pages or like, I don't know, a certain amount of paragraphs or something. And she told us, and she did preface this by saying it was kind of like a dated thing that one of her professors taught her like way back when like, I guess misogyny was a little bit more, well, not even a little bit more rampant, but just maybe more blatant or obvious. But it was, and I'm going to butcher this, but the phrase was something like, it should be long enough to cover, or it was related to a girl's dress. It said it should be long enough to cover everything, but short enough to keep it interesting. And this is about, again, writing a paper. So if we can apply that same concept to music, you need to use the amount of words to say what you need to say, but keep it short enough to keep it interesting and not, tiresome or laborious to listen to. All right, that being said, we're going to get in a little bit. This thing actually has some juice. All right, so for the sake of guitar being, and for you guitarists out there, the key of E is kind of like the easiest key. I think on keys, it's probably the key of C because it's all white keys. I'll work in both because essentially we're just going to kind of transpose what we're talking about. So the idea here is this, and maybe this is something I could recommend or something that was at least helpful for me, was when I really started wanting to, get super familiar with the fretboard, I had to break down what I was playing and kind of like start over and use that alphabet kind of analogy to sort of like rebuild the things that I'd already been saying for years. And I think a lot of guitar players in particular go through that because we learn like shapes and we just want to like rock out. And then like as we, maybe decide to pursue music more seriously, we have to kind of undo a lot of bad habits. And I think other instruments maybe have a more linear approach to building these fundamentals more so than like guitar. But we're going to start with the major scale. So again, I know we have varying degrees of musicians here. So I'm going to keep it, at least for this first one, just pretty basic. If I'm going too fast, just shoot me a comment, let me know. Also, like, you can let me know if the guitar is too loud or something like that, or if I have a nice smile today. I don't know. Anyway, so in E major, we're going to talk about the major scale. The major scale has 7 notes. The 8th note is we call it an octave because it's one, perfect chiclets, thank you. It's one octave above the next one. So in E major, we're going to start with our open E. I think the way they teach it on guitar is like 3 notes a string. Whatever you want to do is cool. I really want to focus more on, instead of positions on the guitar, more of just the musical composition of it. That way, if you play piano or something like that, you can, apply this same information. And if you have your instrument, your guitar or your piano next to you, like, please follow along and just kind of, at the least make sure I'm not lying to you about things. So for E major, and something you can do, I'm just to stop myself for a second, something that you can do here is, if you're interested in the things I'm talking about, there's tons of information on the internet if you want to go back and break this down a little bit more. So E major, the major scale, the way we construct it is we go from the starting note, we go whole, half, whole, half, right? A whole step on a guitar is 2 frets. So in E major, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this here. It sounds like this. And the notes that we're playing, and this is our alphabet. So we want to make sure that like we're actually retaining this at some point, or drilling it in, practicing, knowing essentially how to spell these chords, right? So we have E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E again, right? That's our 8th note, our octave, and starts over. And you can keep going, you can just keep cycling it. Now, one thing that you can do diatonically, what that means is along the lines of this scale, we can play that same scale in chords. So what you can do here, and just in a nutshell, for each one of these notes, it's called an interval, and we'll assign a number to them just in order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the 1, 4, and 5 intervals are major, and the 2, 3, and 6 are minor. The 7th is a diminished chord. So what that means is this: if we take these intervals, we can take those letters of the alphabet, put them together to make words or chords. So for a major chord, we're going to use the 1, the 3, and the 5, which is the first note, the third note, 2, 3, and the 5th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So in E major, we have E, G sharp, and B. Now, there's different kinds of chords, right? I think the example they always say is like a major chord sounds happy and a minor chord sounds sad. So like E major versus E minor. So the only difference there is, instead of using the first note, the third note, and the 5th note, we use the first note. We take that third note and we move it down a half step. So instead of having E, G sharp, and B, we'll have E, G, and B. So now how you can check this in the difference, like when I played those two chords, so I have my E major chord, and let's just check to see what notes I'm actually holding, right? So I have E, B, E, G sharp, B, and E. Now in this position, if I want to play it minor, I just lift my index finger up. So now I have E, B, E, G, B, E. So that G defines the chord there. So it's either, if it's major, it's a G sharp, and if it's minor, it's just a G natural. And that third is really, it gives the flavor of the chord. Now, we can also talk about extended chords. And again, this is sort of throwing a lot to the wall and seeing what sticks. But if we want to have an extended chord, we would take that 1, 3, 5, and then maybe add like a 7th on top or a 9 on top. And we can do stuff. If we play like a major 7 chord, we get this flavor, as opposed to just an E major. So there's this song, like, if you just want to real quick compare these different kinds of E's, right? So we have E major 7, E dominant 7, right? I think that's a song, was it Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Richer? It's a great song. Also nostalgic for me. I think I was like maybe 8 years old when it came out, so I loved it. But in any event, these different flavors, these different textures of these chords, we can be very deliberate about. And the more you kind of get familiar with these tones, for example, if you can, the same way you know that this chord is major and this chord is minor, could be the same way that you know that this chord's a major 7 and this chord's a dominant 7. For me, and I think for a lot of musicians I'm not visually artistic, but I know a lot of my friends who are like really great painters and great musicians. There's like a cross between how they associate certain tones and certain chord types. So like maybe like for one of my friends, like an E major 7 might sound like green, and like a minor 7 might sound like yellow. I don't know. I think it's called synesthesia. It's when your brain kind of like crosses and associates these things together. But what I came to learn was that I was working in Guitar Center Whereas actually where I met Jeff, this was like years ago, maybe like 7 years ago at this point. And Guitar Center is a place where lots of people come in and play all sorts of stuff, some good, but probably most bad. And I started just trying to identify what chords or what chord types or what notes people were playing without looking at the fretboard. And what I came to find out was that they're all very distinct fingerprints. So you can hear a chord like this and know that it's a dominant chord. I'm sorry, it's a diminished chord. You can substitute a dominant chord in for it. But these different chord types, these different voicings, they have very distinct fingerprints. And I think one of the challenges in playing with and recording with Kindo, especially with two guitars, is coming up with a part that is, again, we're talking about like having something to say. So kind of like what me and Joey do when we are recording guitar is if we can mute the guitar part and not miss it, then it doesn't really belong there. So a lot of the stuff is actually like pretty, at least on the newer tracks. I don't know if you guys have been tuning in, obviously you're all patrons, but the newer tracks have been kind of sparse guitar playing. And I think it's one part of my evolution as a guitar player and as a songwriter and as a human being of just like, yeah, I don't think that needs anything right there. Or, you know what, maybe I should lay out for this part. And that's been a really refreshing experience, actually. And working with Joey is really great with that. He's got a wonderful ear as well. So we're able to kind of like, become a mega person and come up with a dope guitar part together. So it's pretty cool. So back to this E major scale. So we can play this in chords. So I started saying the 1, 4, and 5 are major, the 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and the 7 is diminished. So if I play the scale in notes, it sounds like this. And if I play it in chords, it sounds like this. So all I'm really doing there is taking this major scale and then building it or playing it in chords. And one thing that's interesting and one thing that I kind of always, I think, knew intuitively, just like by hearing things, but didn't really understand until I started breaking what I was playing down in like a more analytical way, was that obviously in E major, in the major scale, every note in that scale will work over any song in that scale. I think like your starting point, like the note that you start on over a chord, or maybe the note that you land on when a chord changes, can be more impactful than a lot of guitar players or just soloists in general realize. For example, if there's a chord progression and someone's taking a solo, without realizing it, they might kind of be floating over the thirds of the chord, the third interval of the chord, which is that like defining interval of like, is this major or minor or diminished, or actually augmented would be the fifth. But a lot of people naturally kind of gravitate towards that. So they'll play something like this for an E major. This note right here, when I actually look at it, I'm playing a G sharp, which is the third of E major. So a lot of times when you hear someone playing a solo, especially like bluesy stuff, I mean, I'm a pretty bluesy player. When you hear that kind of stuff, you're really just like outlining these notes that are sort of pre-approved to work over whatever chord is happening in that scale. But if you break down the notes in every chord, so we just said like, what I played was major for the 1, minor for the 2, minor for the 3, major for the 4, major for the 5, minor for the 6, diminished for the 7, and then back to major for the 1. So if I look at every single one of those chords and the notes that comprise them, these letters of the alphabet that comprise them, the May I Help You riff from Wayne's World, if you look at all those notes, they're all within that scale. So a lot of times when people are starting to like solo over stuff, they're quite intimidated. And I don't want to say it's not that serious, but you're given, when you say like what key is this song in and you're soloing in that key, you're essentially given a blueprint to what notes will definitely work over that. Now, are there other notes that can also work and actually probably be more defining that maybe don't lie within the scale? Of course. And you can, use notes outside of a scale as like a passing tone. You can flat a note to just add a different, and this is, it's a little bit more heady and complex than I'm saying right now, but it's, down the line kind of thing. But, you can, to change this fingerprint that we're talking about with chords, you can do that with a solo over whatever chord you're playing. So for instance, like kind of like when I pick up a guitar and I'm noodling around, like I kind of like, I'll default to certain licks sometimes, whatever, if I'm not like staying too proactive and like maybe going to muscle memory. But one flavor that I really love is using a flat sixth, right? So that this note right here, a C, is not in an E major scale. A C sharp would be the sixth, right? But it does have its own very unique, very distinct effect on the tension that's created over that chord. So just to get back into this a little bit, when we are, and especially, I mean, really any instrument, but on guitar, one thing that's also been super helpful for me has just been learning even the same things in different spots on the neck. So if we're playing a major scale, maybe learn how to play it in different positions. Gotta practice on that. But that's just gonna help with fretboard familiarity. And another exercise that was also like super helpful for me was saying the note that I was playing as I was playing it. So if I'm playing the major scale in E, I might say like E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E as I'm playing it, to kind of like reconnect myself to what I'm doing with my hands. I think that there's definitely, and I think this is the goal, like when you're playing an instrument, is when you are actually playing your instrument, maybe at a performance, or if you're picking up your instrument to just like get into it for, number one, it's a very therapeutic thing if you throw yourself into it fully. And in order to do that, you have to kind of be operating in a different sort of mode. It's not quite autopilot, but it is somewhere in between being super focused and aware of what you're doing and being in like this flow state of just like letting what you're feeling coming out, translate onto your instrument. I don't think that it's really an easy thing to do. And I think that a lot of musicians spend a large portion of their early years and maybe entire lives like trying to tap into that. It's a vulnerable place, it really is. It's easy. I remember like when I stuck at the precipice. I think that when I first started really, really being able to get into that every now and then, I was at a point in my life. I think I was like in college and like I just got my heart broken or something, and I was just like I needed music. Like it was something that ended up being really cathartic for me and really really valuable and important for my own mental well-being. But the trick to being able to do that is to, when you're practicing, to practice in an overly conscious way, which is essentially like putting on a metronome and playing through your scales and doing this kind of thing, or working on something you're not good at, or learning a new technique, or all of these things. And we always, I think in general in life, but especially with music, we only see the tip of the iceberg. I have like guitar students who who they want to, let's say do something that I'm trying to show them, but they're not willing to do what I did to be able to play it in the first place. And that's just, I think, like I said, in general in life, you really just see the tip of the iceberg of people. You see, especially in like the Instagram days. I hope Steve is watching this so he can hear that I agree with him on this. But everyone is always posting their best picture, their best take of the best picture, and all the good things in their life. And hopefully they are as happy as whatever it is they're broadcasting to you with their little media conglomerates that they have in their pocket. But I think a lot of times when we look at other people, it's easy to just see that tip of the iceberg and not understand all the hard work that has gone into it. I was just watching, sure a lot of you guys know who Corey Henry is. I was just watching a video of him playing earlier today. And I was like, man, this dude has probably spent so many hours at his organ, like just over the years, for years and years and years. So in any event, yeah, so conscious practicing is super important. So something I used to do, maybe this is helpful, maybe it's not. I used to write out every scale, every note of every scale, and then I would write out all the chords and all the notes that were in there and different variations of them. That helped me just kind of retain that information. What I was trying to do at the time was map out my fretboard in a way where it's like if you told me to play like an E flat, could just automatically be there and just knew where it was. And I could do that to a certain extent at the time, but I wanted to get much more fluid in it. Just knowledge of your instrument is so important, But yeah, so one thing I did was write out all the scales, all the notes, and then I would practice them and say them out loud, like I was showing you guys earlier. That sort of stuff is part of that like more methodical, analytical sort of state of practicing. And again, when you step on stage to play a show, you don't necessarily want to be thinking that technically in your mind, because there's going to be some drop off of like channeling that energy that you're trying to convey, trying to translate. So you really want it to be like second nature. So in the shed, as we call it, if you when you're in the shed, you got to practice. That's different than just playing. And sometimes I'll just, I catch myself now, pick up my guitar and just kind of like noodle around and play. Mainly because I just like when I have a few minutes, like I do want to just still play my instrument for my own enjoyment, and not just be like a workhorse, just like always like transcribing songs and stuff. But it's important to do that more methodical work. Let's see. Do I think about scale degrees when I'm soloing? If so, how do you keep that from making your playing feel robotic? And if not, how did you get to the point where you didn't have to? When you say, do I think about scale degrees when I'm soloing? Do you mean, am I thinking in terms of modes, or do you mean, am I thinking like, oh, let me go to the third over this chord kind of thing? I will wait. To answer, I mean, I can probably start answering the question without that specific. More so the second one. Sometimes, yeah. It depends. It really depends. Like I think, like I said, I think there's a degree of intuition that happens that I only started to understand once I reverse engineered my playing. So I would maybe listen to. Yeah, actually, this is probably a better thing to say. When I was in school, I got really into like finger style guitar, where I would play like the bass line and the melody on top, and things like this. And it's really interesting style of playing. But part of playing like that would make me, I mean, it would slow me down. I'd have to figure out how to actually hold the chord and hold the melody note and then switch to the next chord with that melody note there. So it kind of slowed me down, and I was able to look at my playing and be like, oh, over this note, if you're playing a B in the bass here, and then you're playing the, there was definitely a period of like reverse engineering that, but I think it mostly for me stemmed from already have been playing and like not kind of like didn't know what I was doing, and then I would take a look at it and be like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. Sometimes now, um, yeah, it's sometimes deliberate now. I think a lot of it, like I said, it stems from that practice mindset. And then when I go to play a show, I might not, maybe I'm not being so methodical about the way I'm thinking. I think part of that is one, just playing a lot. Like anytime you play, you're reinforcing some things, both from a technical, physical perspective, and from like your ears get repetitions too. I always like, and a ton of musicians do this, is like, I call it ear shedding. It's like sometimes you just got to listen to things and wrap your head around what's going on and the tensions that are happening. And that kind of like ultimately will embed itself into your musical DNA, especially if it's coming from a place of like, oh, like that was really cool. What did that guy do here? And then you go to break it down, and then it might just be like another tool you added to your toolbox. And again, when you go to play live, I think it should be a little bit less analytical, but only if you've done the work to make it second nature. Did that make any sense? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Listening to music makes you a better musician in the same way that reading makes you a better writer. I don't know why I'm reading this out loud, because I'm sure you guys can all see the comments as well, and are probably reading them more so than looking at me. So maybe I won't do that, but I will comment on them though. That's a great way to put it. I mean, the other thing too is that just listening to music, you know, if you listen to, I don't know, like I was big into blues, but if you listen to blues, like there is some traditional blues that is just very, very, very traditional and basic, and you have your three chords, and that's cool. Then if you listen to jazz, you're hearing all these maybe different tensions that you've never heard before, different like um, different utilizations of chords and chord types and things like this. And I remember like when I first started kind of like branching out into like a more, I guess, sophisticated musical world. By the way, do you see my TV in the background? Just keeps lighting up. I'm not really watching it, but it's just on. I get lonely in the hotel. Um, but yeah, so I started listening to like music with new flavors, and even now, like I've recently been listening to like Indian music and Middle Eastern music. And one, they have different scales, which is like completely mind-boggling from the mind's perspective, because it's just an unfamiliar thing, for me musically. So it's really always kind of piques my interest in a totally different way. I guess the same way as like eating a new food, like and experiencing a new taste or like a new sensation would be. Um, so yeah, I agree with that, and I think that you know you can kind of, we're all thieves, all right? This is just, let's just put this out there. With music, there's three things that you do: you imitate, you assimilate, and then you innovate. So what that means is like at first you don't know what your voice is, you're like copying things that you like, you're imitating them. Ultimately you imitate enough different things where you kind of assimilate them, blend them into like one meld of those influences, and then you innovate with them and you maybe create something new, or that kind of thing. I think that even for my own playing, sometimes I can like be like, oh yeah, I just stole that right out of a BB King lick. Like there are certain things that I haven't broken from, that were like from earlier stages of being a musician, and like more not necessarily trying to sound like someone else, but also just yeah, you even when you're a kid. I mean, again, just thinking about it from like talking and speaking a language, like when you're a baby, like the first thing you do is imitate a word that someone else said to you. I know this because I have little brothers and sisters, and I had to learn to watch my language around them because they would repeat things. They were like little parrots, and so that's what we all do. We do that with music. It's a language, and That's pretty helpful. I'm gonna read this one because now I just feel weird by not reading it. That's pretty helpful. So, assuming you've put in the work and developed the vocabulary, is there any particular mindset or exercise you use in a live setting to get out of your head and play fluently? Whoo! Wow. Yeah, definitely. Everyone has their own. Yeah, a ton of drugs. Exactly. Everyone has their own method of doing this, and I think there's a decent amount of exploration and discovery that needs to happen to find out what's right for you. Um, for me personally, I, here's what I will say. In more recent years, I've become a more frazzled person, and I think it's because I'm just sick of people's shit. No, I'm just kidding. I live in New York, which is very overstimulating, and for me, it's very important to kind of have a break from whatever's going on because I'm not always in New York playing, but I have to separate myself from the chaos that's happening. Um, and believe me, that's everywhere at every show. So yeah, taking some time. I like to warm up maybe a little bit, not all the time. Some shows I just like to pick up the guitar cold and just go let it rock. Um, but to tap into that like sort of flow state I was talking about, I mean, I'm not going to endorse any kind of unhealthy behavior. Some people like to maybe like have like a drink, like a beer before they play or something like that, just to like loosen up a little bit. Some people like to meditate. Some people like to like go for a run. It really just varies. And like I said, there's a decent amount of exploration that I think that goes into that to find out what works best for you. Cause like, dude, for years, like I was probably doing things before shows that like didn't help me get to that place at all. I think a lot of it for me too is just trusting the people I'm on stage with and feeling like I can be comfortable and vulnerable or comfortable in that vulnerability, with them. And also, what helps a lot is to play in front of strangers, as weird as it sounds. Um, I think for most people, like when you first start like playing shows and stuff like that, it's all people who you know, like your family and your friends and like things like that. Maybe your friends more than your family, I don't know. But there's this weird thing that happens there where everyone knows you from before you're doing what you're doing. So they kind of like revert the dynamic. Like, I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but the most freeing thing I've ever done was play in a room where I knew zero people because really they didn't know what I was like in sixth grade. They didn't know, my business and my personal life, things like that. I could just go on stage and be myself. And that's the coolest person you can ever be. It's just totally 100% who you are. I think it's more difficult than people realize to do that. I should say this. First of all, it is a difficult thing. Anyone who says otherwise is full of shit. Excuse my language. I hope there's no kids that I'm soiling out there. Um, a lot of times, people's judgments of you box you in, and you got to break. Like the goal is, I think, for everyone to break free of that. Like obviously, like you shouldn't. People say you shouldn't care what people think. I don't know if that's true. I think to a certain degree, you need to care what people think. 'Cause everyone thinks you're an asshole, like you're probably an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, um, but anyway, kind of off on a tangent there. Yeah. If I mean, for me, I love being on stage. It's an awesome thing. I definitely have been scared to go on stage or had anxiety and things like that. I remember we played this one show in Boston a few years ago, and it was like a weird show because it was like at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So we kind of like had a show normal time the night before, and we were still like tired. And sound check was like really early in the morning. I think it was snowing outside, and it was all in front of like all Berkeley kids, and I was just so nervous because music school kids really watch what you're doing. You're on the judgment, you're on the hot seat. All right, I'm gonna hop back in a little bit into some more music theory. Let me just hit these questions real quick. My experience with learning different languages. Repetition is key to learning and reinforcing anything. Definitely. Performing on stage is the worst. Holy shit, it's nerve-wracking. It is, man. I think, like I said, if you can perform in front of complete strangers, um, it's pretty freeing. Enjoy your ice cream. Love you too. Any more tours coming soonish? Yeah. So I'm like, I don't think I'm supposed to say anything about this today. But I don't really, whatever. I do what I want. So we're going to be doing or I should say, we're in the process of trying to put together a couple of runs early next year and maybe next summer. A lot goes into it, and there's lots of moving pieces. So we'll keep you posted definitely as soon as we know more and we have more details finalized. But yeah, we're trying to get back on the road. We kind of didn't, not even kind of, like we did a tour before we put out our new record, which is not usually the standard way of doing things. You usually put out a record and then tour. But I mean, like, Kindo, I don't think it's ever been do it like everyone else would. Any chance Kindo would come west ever? Yeah. Last year or two, I don't know if it was last year or two, I think a year ago, we were out west and our van broke down, so we had to miss a bunch of shows. But we didn't forget about that, and we're definitely trying to make up for some of that stuff, just in terms of making up those shows. And we missed a lot of you guys from that fiasco. I'm gonna hop back into music for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to talk less. I guess I'll keep answering questions. But I just wanted to just kind of revisit this idea of playing the major scale and chords, and then some substitutions and some things that you can maybe do. So major scale, we're in E major. So the 1 is major, the 2, so E major, the 1 B major. The 2, which is F sharp, is minor. The 3, which is G sharp, is minor. The 4, which is major, A major. 5 is B major. 6 is C sharp minor. 7 is D sharp diminished. And then we're back to E major. Now, if we wanted to go a step further than this, we can do this. And I'm going to play this a little higher up in the neck to get some cooler voicings. Instead of the 1 being major, we can say the 1 is a major 7. The 2 is a minor 7. 3 is a minor 7. 4 is a major 7. Yeah. 5 is dominant 7. 6 is minor 7. 7 is still diminished, like half diminished, whatever. And then back to major 7, E major 7. So one thing, I mean, like, and this is probably more helpful for guitar players than anybody else, but one thing that I'll do here, Kindo wants you to learn your major 7ths. Damn right we do. One thing that I like to do here when I'm playing is there's chords that are in between that are not technically in the scale but can work. And I kind of like not even found out about this, but most of my musical experience has just been self-discovery and just kind of like fumbling on things. And I'm just going to slide, or actually, I guess I can do, all right, so if we switch to the key of C major, sorry, guitar players, we switch to the key of C major, we can do something interesting. It's just a little bit easier to see on the neck visually. So we can play our major scale and chords again. And then one thing that you can do is you can start to see there's like a lot of overlap happening between the chords. So as a kid, I guess, one of the things I tried to do because when you first start playing guitar, switching chords is like impossible. It seems easy, but there is a learning curve there. So one thing I would do is I would look at the first chord I was playing, and I look at the second chord I was playing, and then I'd see, are there any common notes? And really it was like out of lazy, let's call it efficiency. But you can probably deduce that it was from laziness. I wanted to like move as little or as few of my fingers as possible. So I started doing things like maybe holding it differently instead of going up here to play. So again, C major, D minor, 3, E minor, 4, F major, 7, 5. I should be a little bit quicker than this. 5, G7, 6, A minor, 7, 7. Seventh chord would be B diminished, and then back to C major. So one thing I started doing is I started finding different ways to play these kind of same chords, but like instead of playing a D minor here, I might play it like this. So the color of the chord changes a little bit. But for me, it was just a little bit easier just to, well, one, it was cool to have like these like maybe not so textbook voicings that's, helped me sound like me a little bit more, relatively. And then what I started realizing too was like, oh, well, if I just maybe go in between the chords and the root. So if you're going from the 1 to the 2, the 1 chord to the 2 chord, in this case, you have C major to D minor, right? They're one step away from each other. So there's a note in between there, right? So that's C sharp, right? So we go C, C sharp, and D. Now, in like a bootlegged way to try to learn jazz or like, have some more interesting kind of flavors and voicings happening, what I started doing was just kind of like just changing the root note. So I took that C major 7 and I just changed the root note to a C sharp. Now, in this case, if I only move the root note up, I would actually have a chord called a C sharp 7 flat 5, right? Or I guess a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 would be the right way to say that, right? So by just taking this chord that I was already holding and then just changing one note on it, in this case it being the root note, I had a whole new world of like these in-between chords, as like I call them, that are in between the diatonic chords that you can play. So yeah, so we have our 1, our 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chords that are, again, these pre-approved chords for you to play that fit inside this scale. And then we have like this kind of unlimited amount of possibilities of chords in between that maybe use most of the same, most of the notes from the scale, or most of the notes in that chord are from the scale, except for like maybe 1 or 2, and it'll add like a really interesting tension. So then you can start doing stuff like this, as if I was going to play, let's say, chords 1 through 5 of the C major scale. I could probably play in between all of those. Let's see if I still got it. Oops. No. There it is. So yeah, in that case, all I was doing was just kind of like making sure I was playing a chord on the note in between the chords that are diatonically in the scale. Now there are definitely more sensible ways to go about this rather than just like self-discovery. But one, like, we're running out of time and I want to make sure I answer your questions, some more of your questions. And then 2 is like, I really do believe in the power of like self-discovery on your instrument. And you might have, it might be maybe a slightly slower progress than if you like enrolled in jazz school and were taught things in a very linear curriculum. But you might have a few more aha moments where you're like, oh, this is why this works. Like, there was a huge jump for me when I started understanding why what I was playing worked. I could just, maybe before I chalked it up to this magical thing that I was unexplainable, that like, oh yeah, I don't know, but I know when I play this note, when I go here, it sounds good. And then I was like, well, why does it sound good? Like, why does that work? And why do I gravitate towards that so much? And again, I just started just like breaking down everything I was playing. And, you know, I, in some instances, I'm sure I surprised myself of being like, oh, actually, that's pretty heady what you were doing. Like you started on the flat seventh over this chord, and that made it this really cool kind of arpeggiated melody. And then sometimes, like I'm sure I was like largely unimpressed and being like, oh yeah, that of course that works because every other guitar player that's ever existed has played it exactly like that. But I try not try not to be so hard on myself these days. One thing I want to just touch on really quickly before before I have to split here. Um, oh no, someone had an error on the. Can you guys still hear me and see me? We just got a message saying someone's stream got messed up, probably for their own benefit. I'm gonna have some cranberry juice, and I don't think that there's any juice in this, like at all. Oh, 20% juice. I don't know what that means. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that 20% of this liquid is juice from the fruit, from the cranberry, and the rest is just like water? Or does it mean that, like, I don't know. I don't know what it means. Yeah, what is the 80%? You know, what is that? Like food coloring red number 6 or some shit? The rest is water and sugar, probably. But is it by volume, like 20% by volume? That would make sense, right? I love how this is like the most amount of comments that I've got. But I appreciate you juice connoisseurs out there. Wow, I did not realize how thirsty I was. To answer the tour question again, we are in the works of planning some things. Actually, I have some questions for you guys, if that's okay. So I have been talking to the boys a little bit. Part of one of the hard parts about putting together tours is that we can have like a set of dates that works for us and like we like an ideal routing, and then like maybe the venue is already booked or something like that. And we were thinking as maybe a way to um it's what plants crave. Oh my god, what is that from Idiocracy? Um one of the things that we've been kind of discussing, and it's obviously like actually it's really not up to us, it would be up to you guys, but would you guys be interested at all, like, and a few years ago in Nashville, we put on, or we didn't even put it on. There was this awesome group of dudes who had this pretty dope little house like at the end of a street, and they put on house shows, and we played a house show, and it was like I think there were 30 tickets, 30 people came. It was like one of the funner nights that we've had, I think, just musically speaking and things like that. So the only thing about that is we all live in New York in like probably like smaller apartments than most of your like guest bedrooms. So obviously we can't do it at our house. But and also for the sake of moving around, we would have to, you know, host them in different cities and stuff like that. We haven't really worked out the exact specifics of it yet. But we're just to like get a preliminary interest gauge. If you guys, are interested in that, it might be something that we can explore a little bit more, and see how possible it is. All right, let me get back to these comments here. Rest of water and sugar. Thank you. I am excited we're excited to play for you guys again. We've been cooking a lot of new music and a lot of new flavors, that you guys have obviously, been on the receiving end of. And yeah, we would totally love to be playing more. That's kind of the goal. It's nice to like be in the studio and making new music. It's also nice to be playing shows. I don't think that those two activities necessarily need to be mutually exclusive. But it does prove hard to keep recording music when you're on the road. So they kind of are, one or the other simultaneously, I guess. Do you use those passing chords to transition between diatonic? Where did it go? Diatonic chords in a tune, or actually write them in a tune? Both. To answer your question, you can definitely use them as a passing chord, like what I was doing there, which is like, right? But also the cool thing you can do is like, we didn't really get into this, and my fault. I probably was talking about something not music related too much, but in terms of chord substitutions, I think I started to talk about it. Is when you look at the notes that comprise each one of these chords, what you'll come to realize is that they're usually just the same notes in a different order, right? So, for example, if we play like a C major 7 chord, right? So, in this case, the alphabet, the letters that comprise this chord are the 1, 3, 5, and major 7th of the scale. So, in C major, that would be C would be the 1, E would be the 3, G would be the 5, and B would be the 7th. So we have C, E, G, B, right? Now, if we look at an A minor 9 chord, and if we look at the notes that we're holding down there, we're holding down an A, a G, a C, an E, and a B. So the only difference there was that just we put an A in the bass note of it, but we're and kind of reordered in terms of this specific voicing. But when we look at the notes that we're playing, we're still playing C, E, G, and B in both those chords. Now we're just adding an A underneath it, and now it's an A minor 9 chord, if that makes sense. So what you'll see a lot, and myself included, what you see a lot of people do is use them in conjunction and maybe leave out the root note of that A minor chord. So you do something like this. Right? So all I'm doing there is like I can just play a million different versions of C major 7 or some kind of C major chord. Right? So all of those were just C major chords. Now, if I want to think about it, I could also say like, oh, well, I'm really playing an A minor 9, but without the A in the bass. The goal, I think, is to kind of shed, especially for guitar players. Pardon me. I think the goal for guitar players is to shed the idea of those shapes being separate things. I think piano players have an easier time with it because if they were playing a C major 7 chord or an A minor 9 chord like we are, one of their hands is probably staying the same and they're changing, something in the other hand. So that's been kind of like probably the last like 10 years of my guitar playing is to be like, no, that's not an A minor chord and that's not a C major chord, but they actually are both of those things. You can think about it however you want. Music theory is interesting it's just whatever perspective that you're looking at. So to go back to your question about the passing chords there, sometimes, and we'll do this in Kindo too. So if you take something like a diminished chord, for example, well, I guess it would be more like a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Pardon me. You can tritone sub a dominant 7 chord in, right? Now, do they have different flavors? Like 100%. Like they don't sound exactly similar. But in terms of chord substituting, a lot of times, what you do is you look at the alphabet, you look at the letters of the notes that make up each one of these chords, and you realize they're actually way more similar than they are different. Not always true. This is, kind of like glossing over here just to answer your question, but yeah, me and Joey, like, we do that all the time. Part of the challenge of, I think, writing a cool guitar part is just like not playing like voicings that are, I don't want to say that aren't that easy to hear out, because like my goal isn't to write clever parts as much as it is to try to find something that sounds like unique, that's like true to my voice as a guitar player, and that still serves the music, isn't too notey. And a lot of times that comes in like these different little chord, um I'll call it like a chord progression inside of a chord progression, um which is like, if here's our chord progression, I might be doing some stuff on top, just like what I was showing you there. We'll just keep that as the example. Just like having these different, instead of being like, oh, we're playing C and then like just playing this chord, like, I don't want to say anyone can do that, because that's not really true either. But how do you make it more interesting is kind of finding these combinations of voicings that you can use. So maybe if like, even if like Joey's playing a open C chord on his acoustic guitar, I'm probably not going to be doing that same thing, as he is. I'm probably going to counter with something a little bit more, um, I don't want to say busy necessarily. That's not necessarily the case, but some different kind of flavor. There are also some times where we don't want to have our parts be too contrasting. There's sometimes where, either one of us doesn't play, or maybe we're playing the same thing, or not necessarily the same thing, but uh, maybe he's playing something here and I'm playing it up here. It doesn't always have to be like so crazy different. Also, the other thing with Kindo is that there's just so much happening that everyone needs to be really responsible with what they're saying. Otherwise, it can get pretty mumbo jumboed, and like, obviously those guys have amazing tastes, and I trust them really a lot with their musical choices. So there is like a serious degree of responsibility though that comes in just being like, hey, like, do I know that like you can play way more than you are? Yeah, but like, I know that you're not going to, because you're serving the song. That's, I think that comes with maturity too as a musician. Um, Also, if you're adding them where they aren't written, do you approach knowing when slash how much to use them? Um, I don't know. I might have kind of answered. I don't know if I kind of answered that. I'm like, oh wow, I'm behind on these comments. My bad. Uh, all right. If we're adding them where they aren't written, do you approach knowing when slash how much to use them? I think that's just like a case by case. There are times when I'll say this: space is valuable. Empty space is valuable. So there are times when like I can of course put in a passing chord that will sound cool, and there are times when it'll ruin the moment. Um, I think the most valuable thing you can do with those chords is know why they work and when they could be cool. But also understanding that just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think it's a valuable lesson just in general in life. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I like simplicity. I'm definitely not a simple like person, like in the literal sense of the Leonard Skinner song. But I think that I think a lot of musicians get eager to use all the cool shit that they've learned, and they end up doing themselves and their music a disservice. And that's a subjective taste thing. I mean, there's some music that I can't stand that like, you know, people freak out over, and I mean, it's just a taste thing. Also, it's like, what do you want your voice to sound like? Like, what do you want to be like? Or what are you trying to say? I think again is really the thing there. So I don't know if that really answered the question because I think I just said don't do it, essentially in a long-winded way. But no, there. I mean, there's definitely times. Also, let's just say this: if we're talking about on guitar, there's a ton of things that you can do without taking up too much space. It could be like maybe like a double stop, like a two note combination, or like maybe you're playing just the top three strings of your guitar. Uh, the biggest mistake that I see with a lot of guitar players is like playing too full of a chord. One, it kind of it will limit what the rest of your band can do if you have a keys player and a bass player. If they want to change the root note or like walk a bass line or something like that, and you're like nailing out this G, on the low E string, you're taking up a part of the frequency space, so you might just want to play. Sorry, I'm gonna get this out of view. But instead of playing this full G chord here, you might just play the top note, or maybe like the third, outline the third, dominant third. All little things you can do, and you just kind of like I don't know what we call them, the sprinkles. You just sprinkle it on there with guitar. So like, there's lots of things I do, and this is like you hear this everywhere in like kind of bluesy guitar playing is like. So there's always like these little like flavors happening. And I only played the full chord at the end, So everything else that's going on there it's not so dense in the voicing that it's redefining the chord. It's more just like a little like, a little loving on top. Come out west. Yo, I need to get out west, man. It's starting to get cold over here. As you can hear, my throat's getting scratchy and stuff. It's just, I hate the winter. That Nashville show was fun. That show was really fun. Oh, Tampa. Oh, we haven't been to Tampa. Where was the place we played in Tampa? It was called like the Orpheum, right? I think it was pretty big. I think that show I left the stage and started a conga line. I don't know if that was the same one. I think it was. And then we got like canceled because of a hurricane the next one. House shows. Yeah, I mean, I would love to come back to Nashville. I think that is. I mean, that's a valuable stop. I think just in terms of. I think the first show I did with Kindo, we ended in Nashville, and so like we went out after the show and like we were just like watching live music. And I have to say, like in New York, I mean, New York is a crazy place if you've ever been. If you haven't, there's just like all kinds of people and like all crazy shit happening at every second. But people at Nashville bars get a different kind of rowdy. They like, I don't even know, man. There was like people dancing on each other's shoulders and like I think we might have seen a fight, like these two dudes. Gentlemanly fight though, oddly enough. You know, I don't know. I didn't think there were any rules in bar fights, but apparently, in the South, it's all good. Um, what's up, Leandro? How is it in Brazil right now? Hopefully not cold like it is here. My arm is doing better. Thank you so much for asking. It is not quite 100%, but I can play guitar again. I'm very happy about that. And I can play shows, and it gets like tight, and when it's cold out, it kind of sucks. Um, but also at the same time, like I didn't think I would have the opportunity, to really, especially this fast. So for those of you that don't know, I mean, I did post on the page, I think recently. I don't know, it was last week, but I got run over by a car and my arm snapped in half. So I've just been spending the large part of the last 6 months. I guess it's almost been 6 months at this point. So there's still a lot of things that like when you get a metal object, like I have a titanium plate put in my arm, it takes your body a while to like really accept that as part of your body. So usually around the 1 year mark, um, they'll reassess the situation and like they might have to like go in and like take it back out. But then there's like other complications that can happen from that. So I've flown a few times since the accident, and I haven't had any trouble with like metal detectors yet, which I was kind of like bummed. I asked my doctor, I was like, "Do I need like a doctor's note?" Like, so they like scan me, and he was like, "No, I think you can just show them your scar and tell them you had surgery." I was like, "That's a good point." Um, 1 second. All right, let's go down here. Private concerts for patrons. Um, the only thing I don't like about charging you guys for like a live performance is that you guys are already so supportive, and you know we just want to make sure we just keep providing you value. I definitely love to be open to the idea of doing like live shows online. We've discussed that idea, and we are figuring out the technical logistics of it, like to have make sure we can get like a good mix and everything sounding good, and I don't know. I'm assuming I think there's like certain platforms out there that allow you to do that already. Just figuring out logistics of that. I would love to do a house show at our house on the internets, on the interwebs for you guys. I don't know how that would work, but we'll have to figure it out. Oh, thank you so much. I am very honored to be able to color a little bit on this fine coloring book that is The Reign of Kindo, or Kindo, whatever you prefer. Come to or around St. Louis and you can stay at my house. Yo, could we throw a show at your house? Because that would be cool. Um, I would love to come to St. Louis. Is it St. Louis, Missouri, or St. Louis, Kansas? Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll Missouri, cool. We will definitely we'll be rolling out some more info on these house show ideas, and like I said, like we can't do it without like, the houses and the people, and I think it would be a grand old time though. I think we would have a lot of fun. I would love to come to St. Louis. Yep. It was the Orpheum. Okay. I'm like so behind in these comments. This is really crazy. Um, Yo, Isaiah, you know what I'm talking about, right? With these cowboys dancing on each other's shoulders and stuff down in Nash. The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. Ah, good record. Dude, at your house, you're deep in the hood. Yo, honestly, I actually have a pretty cool apartment in Brooklyn that would be cool for like a so far sound show or like a that kind of show. I don't know. I'm weird about people being in my house. Not even you guys, just like anybody. Uh, it's my house. I don't know. I mean, I love to like have parties and like me and my roommate have dinner parties a lot, but there's a degree of letting go, which is hard when you've slaved cleaning your apartment and keeping it orderly, where you just got to be like, no problem. Someone spilled sticky shit all over my floor. I'll get over it. Or like on this new rug that I just bought, or like something like that. And yeah, I don't know. I feel a little weird about it. All right, I'm gonna hit these last few and I'm gonna play you out. And then I'm gonna probably go to bed. Um, I appreciate your music questions, Austin. Do not apologize. You talked about finding a part that complements the rest of the group. Is there anything you do to try and make your parts fresh? I find myself going for the same voicings and rhythm over and over again. Yeah, man. I mean, I think I don't know. For me, I feel like I recycle a lot of things. I think it's just also context in how that works. Um, for instance, like in this new track we're working on this month, I'm not sure when it's going to be released. I'm guessing end of the month. Um, I do this lick. I'll play you the lick, and then you can see if you hear it in the song. Um, it was partially I changed the rhythmic idea of it that would normally do, and then it's just where it entered in the measure was not in a normal way that I would do it. So like sometimes it's like even taking that same thing that you do, and instead of playing it on like beat 2, play it on like the end of 3 or like something like that. You want to get careful because like, or you should be careful with that just because sometimes you can just start like, I don't know, this happens to me when I'm like in Logic or Pro Tools or something like that, where I'm just like, oh, I could just cut this and move it over here. And it's like cool. And it's like not really organic anymore. It's just like, oh, it could sound cool over here. Here's the lick that I played in the song. I don't know when this is going to be out. I don't know if the boys are still tuned into the chat. I doubt that they are. I think the end of the month, but the lick goes like this. Wait, I have to remember this real quick. It was but it was like really, I don't even know how, can't even remember how I played it, but it was something like, there was something like that. Fuck. That's the slower version of it. But yeah, it was just like, maybe I would normally do something like this where I would go. But there's. So sometimes it's just like taking that same idea that you have, the same phrasing. Another thing you can do is take what you know already and play it in a different spot on the neck. So like if you're going to play like, where can you? So like just like having to move your hand in a different position in a different way will give you kind of a fresh thing. I mean, obviously I didn't play those lines exactly, and that's my point, is like even when I try to do the same thing, because like I'm half battling muscle memory on that, I end up with like something slightly different. If you take even like same stuff, trying to keep it clean, play it 5 different spots on the neck. I don't even know what the next one is. So just doing that, again, it's the same concept when you're playing the same thing in different parts on the neck. So again, like these little things are just, I think for me, it helped kind of like tie things together by doing that, of just having like these different positions where I could try to play the same thing, but maybe like the fingering is a little different, or the tone of the string is different and will inspire something different coming from there. And then from there, it's just, again, making sure that I'm not clashing with anything that's going on or like playing too much. All right. Let's see what else we got here. I'm sorry. I'm in Pittsburgh and I have like a bunch of things happening now. So you guys are the most important though. I love you. And Austin, I do want to say too, I think there's a degree of proactiveness that needs to happen in order to bust out of a plateau. One thing that I did, or I can't take credit for it, but one thing that a professor of mine made me do was, he was like, okay, well, play something over this. And he played some chords on the piano and I soloed over it. He was like, okay, now play over this only using the G string and the B string. And I was like, it's not as easy as you think. Like it's actually really challenging because it makes you bust out of this muscle memory that you've kind of drilled in. Which guitarists are inspiring me these days? Wow. There are a lot of guitarists who are like, I don't even want to say up and coming because they're just too good to be called up and coming. But there's a great guitar community on Instagram, and I'm lucky to be friends with a lot of people who really, really inspire me on a musical level. Who can I tell you to go check out? Let's see. There's a cat who lives in New York. His name is Ben Younson. He's a great jazz dude, just a killing player. I'm trying to think of like maybe someone more like mainstream, but that's okay too. Yeah, Julian's great, amazing, obviously. There's a lot of really good guitar players. I think Instagram has is a blessing and a curse because I've been able to just watch people and it just shows up and I'm just watching a lot of stuff. Tyler Bryant, I've been watching a lot of lately, killing like blues player. Trying to think. Obviously Mark Bateri from Snarky Puppy. Marcus Machado, he's been playing a bunch in New York. I've been meaning to go check him out. Let's see who else. There's a ton. Definitely check out like the Pickup Jazz channel on Instagram. There's a ton of players. Horace Bray. He was actually he did a couple shows with us in Boston and Vermont on the last tour. He opened up the show for us when we were playing with Lil Ty B. Is really dope. Yeah, Austin, same thing. It's the same concept. If you're like play only in quarter notes or play only in this rhythm and stuff like that, what it really makes you do is it makes you break from your muscle memory. I think that's really dope. Guthrie, I mean, man, you're talking about monster there. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of like cap up on that, Austin, is a lot of what we do is muscle memory, and we revert back to things, and we do it kind of unconsciously. It's not even subconscious; it's more unconscious. Um, and I think as long as during your practice regimen, you can find a way to be more present and more active, and more proactive in kind of busting out of that. And also maybe just it's reinforcing something new so you have that be the unconscious thing that you revert to. But yeah, all those things are really great. Well, in any event, this has been super fun. Eric Johnson's amazing. Also, I saw Clapton a couple weeks ago. It was my second time seeing him. It was incredible. He brought it that night. I can't say that necessarily about the first time I saw it. That's not true. He still brought it the first night. I think like the energy of this show I just saw, this past one, was I liked it a little better, but still got it, man. Still got it. On that note, I thank you guys so much for coming. We'll be doing this once a month. Next month, you will have the pleasure of not listening to me talk. I'm not sure who it'll be. It could be Joey. Could be Kelly. And it could be Steve, maybe even. I'm not sure. Maybe it's Jeff. Maybe Danny comes in and says a little hello. And then maybe, just maybe, maybe it'll be me again. Well, Well, guys, thanks again so much for tuning in. I don't know how this saves. I'm just gonna click end this thing. I believe it's gonna be up and available to talk. So if you guys want to go back to anything, if you also have any questions, feel free to shoot us a message on Patreon. If you want me to, dive into anything anymore. One thing I do want to say, wait, before I have you, or while I still have you, I should say, we're talking about the key of E major. I just want to say this for guitar players. Learn more than just learn as much as you can. Learn as many different flavors as you can in terms of stylistic soloings. Like I said, I kind of had to, and still in the process of just undoing a lot of habits that I wish I didn't start in the first place on guitar. But keep it long enough to cover everything, short enough to keep it interesting, and just make sure you know what you're saying and how you want to say it. Another thing you can do, so we're talking about different voicings and things like that. Sometimes how you present those voicings is always equally as important, meaning like what's the dynamic behind it. So if I'm going to play like some notes here, it's a difference between playing it like that and playing it. And it's more than a volume change. It's like just like if someone's whispering or someone's screaming at you, they could be saying the same sentence, but it has entirely different meanings. So on that note, have a wonderful night, everybody. We'll catch you next time.